Welcome to The Class Apart. I'm your host, Arjun. Thank you for joining me as I embark upon a journey across the world of higher education. Each episode, we'll discover exciting alumni experiences, gain industry insights with various stakeholders, and explore the ever-changing landscapes of global learning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Class Apart. Thank you for listening. Today's guest is a special guest, and obviously for episode 1, I thought I'd make this quite special. To be very honest with you, this podcast was my New Year's resolution, and obviously it's a bit late, but better late than never. And the reason why it's finally actually starting is because of the guy in the interview. He encouraged me all the way. He's a good friend. I've known him for almost 20 years, 16, but we round up. So I'd like to introduce you to Abhilaksh Lalwani. Hi, Abhilaksh. How's it going?
All great. Thank you so much for having me, Arjun. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I mean, like as good as you can be, locked at home during coronavirus, but it is what it is. Just for the listeners, before we kind of get into the details and get started, I'd just like to ask you, why did you decide to pursue higher education from an international institution, and what did you decide to pursue?
All right. So I'll just tell you what I pursued first before I answer why I decided to pursue international higher education. I wanted to do something that was at the intersection of language and technology because those were my two key interests in school. And I had taken up the International Baccalaureate program, which was offered by our school as an option against the Indian ISC board. So, from an early age, there was always that aspiration for studying at an international university. And I couldn't really find a degree in India that was giving me what I really wanted. There were no courses that were at the intersection of, language and technology. Most leaned to one side or the other. And I obviously didn't want to do two courses, one after the other.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking internationally. I looked at courses in the US where obviously you can choose what your majors are supposed to be and things like that. And I also looked at the UK because, well, my mom had studied there and I'd received some good reviews about universities from the UK from seniors who had passed out from our school in previous years. So I explored the opportunities. I spoke to our school career counselors. And in the end, I decided that, all right, the UK sounded good. So I applied for a few courses that gave me both some kind of language education and some kind of
Mm-hmm.
technology education. So I ended up choosing a degree called linguistics, applied linguistics to be precise, which uses technology and gives a wholesome education about language using technology. And I studied this in King's College London. And from there, I decided to do a master's. So I went to the University of Edinburgh to do a degree in artificial intelligence. I dropped out of that though. And so that's essentially what I studied and why I studied internationally.
So, being from India, you decided to go and study a subject such as applied linguistics at King's College London.
Yeah.
Was that an easy decision to make, considering subject demand in India is more geared towards kind of engineering, law, international relations and business? I mean, this is something which is just completely kind of not the norm. Or did you have to convince anyone, or was it quite a simple decision that, you just did it and it was done?
So, I mean, I had to convince myself more than anyone else, just to get a sense of, okay, I'm going to do this degree. I'm going to spend 3 years of my life studying this. What am I going to get at the end of it? Also, am I going to enjoy doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of questions weren't related to, oh my God, how are other people going to perceive what I'm doing? And how should I explain it to them? They were mostly centered around, should I be doing this? Is this something that I would enjoy doing? And I spoke to several people, friends, teachers in school, the career counselor, my parents, and did quite a bit of introspection and researched, what applied linguistics really meant, because this was just something that came out of an exercise with the career counselor trying to find courses at any university in the world that had technology and language as core components. And so, I mean, the career counselors came up with computational linguistics, which I did not really understand what that meant, in grade 12 when this entire thing was happening. So obviously I had to research, okay, what does this mean? What can I get out of it? And in the end, it seemed like something that I could be interested in, because applied linguistics, it's at the intersection of so many interesting subjects like education and psychology and anthropology and sociology, and using technology to understand all of these fields. So it has bits of philosophy, mostly philosophy of language in it. It's got some neurolinguistics in it. So how does, like how are words formed in the brain? It's got a lot of anthropology in it. So how a language is formed over time. If you leave a group of people on an abandoned island, will they, and and they're just born there from scratch, will they end up developing their own language? And so there are, like really cool things that can be discussed. And obviously, I also remember that around the same time in school in IB, we were studying Pygmalion, which had this professor of linguistics in it. And
Mhm.
you would remember because you studied this too, I think, I'm not mistaken.
I think that's one of the only things I remember from English, Pygmalion.
Yeah, and so there's this professor who's really really good at phonetics, and it seemed like a really really interesting thing for him to be able to tell where a person is from and a lot about them just from listening to them.
Hmm.
And so there was obviously some kind of fascination, and it also met my own personal requirements of being able to do something with that later, because once you're a linguist, apart from just academics, there are so many other kinds of careers that open up, from speech therapy to, if you're doing the technology side of it, to, like developing, natural language processing programs, such as what you have on your phones, like
Alexa and
uh,
Siri and all. Yeah.
Siri or yeah, Alexa or any of these virtual avatars that are actually just listening to you. And so, it was a new field. Artificial intelligence 10, 15 years ago when this was happening was just coming in and, like
Hmm.
exploding. So this seemed like a great opportunity to ride that wave. Yeah, so those were basically the questions that I was dealing with around that point in time.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think I had great professors. I wrote a lot of emails while I was applying for my courses to several of the program heads at the various institutions that I was applying to. And most of them replied back with detailed answers. A lot of the universities had graduates in these things that they allowed you to connect with. If you I mean, I remember I ended up choosing King's College London, so I'd spoken to someone who'd graduated a couple of years earlier from the same program and was working at the BBC doing some kind of podcast kind of show
Hmm.
on the different languages in the region. And so, I mean, people were doing a lot of cool things, and I thought, okay, let's go for it, why not?
Wow, that sounds, I mean, you definitely put a significant amount of thought into what you were about to move into. I mean, I guess that's only natural that you put that much thought into it. But yeah, that sounds like quite a introspective journey in itself, just to decide what you wanted to study at university and where you wanted to study it. So we kind of zoom out a little bit. I just want to ask, like, from a kind of holistic perspective, did your university meet your expectations?
Well, considering that my expectations were formed based on the accounts of people that I knew had gone to university in the same space, yes, it did. I had enough guidance from people a few years older than me, including friends and seniors from school who told me what to expect. There were some things that I did not expect. For example, I did not expect how much of the onus to learn lies on the student compared to the professor at an international university, because here in India, as I mean, they keep attendance, they mark you down if you
Yeah.
attend all the classes and things like that. Whereas at King's, the the entire responsibility for learning was mine. If I did not go to the lectures, like no one would care whether I was there or not, as long as I sat through the exams. And so it was my responsibility, and that is something that I think is a good thing in retrospect, but it takes a little bit of getting used to. And like in the UK, especially in a humanities degree, that's not like hardcore science. A lot of it is based on research.
Yep.
And luckily, because of IB, I wasn't,
Completely lost.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's okay if the professor says, okay, you need to write a 3,000 word essay and get it in by day after. I was able to cope with it, but I could imagine a scenario in which, especially if I'd done ISC, where you don't have to do things like that on a day-to-day basis, the jump could have
Yeah.
been a lot bigger. And this is me speaking academically. Apart from that, obviously coming from an all boys boarding school and being put into a city campus, and that city being London, okay, where obviously I didn't really know what to expect from that kind of an experience. I had visited London before, and I mean, I'm born and brought up in Mumbai, so I knew what a big city could feel like. But London's obviously something else, and the kinds of opportunities that you get in that city, there's always something happening each and every night. So being able to discipline yourself enough to divide your time between the academic aspect of it, which you're essentially paying for, and
Hmm.
you know all the other things that pull you in different directions. There are I think Kings had over like 500 societies and clubs that you could be a part of. So essentially every interest was catered to. So I remember I did a lot of random stuff in the first year. I joined mountaineering club. I went bowling once a week. I joined the film society. I joined multiple publications because anyone who asked me, hey, as a fresher, hey, do you want to do this? I was like, yes, sure, why not? Okay. And yeah, I suddenly realized that okay, I had way too many things going on every week. And so eventually it's like you try everything out and then you focus in on what you would actually just like to be doing on a day-to-day
Yeah,
basis, on a
absolutely.
weekly basis. So it was overwhelming for a bit, but in a good way.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the aspects that does teach you, obviously this is coming from my personal experience, but I do feel that it would be applicable here as well, is that when you have 500 societies plus your lectures plus a city like London, which just outside of societies and King's College London just has that much to offer,
Yeah,
it really throws you in the deep end in terms of one skill which I just think is extremely vital, time management.
that's true.
You
That's
know, I mean,
actually
like
very
when you
true.
just have, yeah, you just have to, and you learn. And I think for me especially, I mean, prioritizing what was important and what could be left is just, I mean, right now it's an everyday thing, right? Like you wake up in the morning and you're prioritizing things one after the other after the other. I mean, and I could only learn how to do that and accept how to do that just via the university experience. When you're kind of just there and the world is your playground, what do you do?
I mean, it's really true. I faced the same thing, and because there are so many exciting things going around, it's really easy to get distracted and start procrastinating.
Yeah.
And that self discipline is something that it took me a little bit of while to get into, because obviously at the school level you have fixed hours for everything. Out here you can
Exactly.
decide what your hours are, and I think that was obviously a big difference in higher education in India and in the UK, at least. I'm not sure about other places where you are responsible for your own schedule.
Hmm.
And, like my university recorded all lectures. So unless I wanted to participate in the discussion, I could also just end up, you know, listening to the recording or something like that.
Yeah.
And
Like while
things
cooking
like
dinner,
that.
you're
And
watching a lecture.
exactly, yeah. I mean, so you can because there's such a wide spectrum of people who come to university, right? There were a few people in my class who were 40 plus, who were restarting in life essentially, or wanted to study again. Where and so there's and I was fresh out of school, so I can understand that they have work, right? Like that they have to go to either part time or full time, where this is just a part of their overall life.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for me, this was why I had come to a new country. So it was evidently a lot more important for me to be there in class. But
Yeah.
I mean, I did attend quite a few lectures just from home, especially in that first winter in London, which I was not used to at all, and stuff like that. But I realized that being able to manage your time is extremely important,
Mhm.
and
That's a lifelong skill.
scheduling yourself is, yeah, it's a lifelong skill that I still use until today. And being able to decide on your own what is important and prioritizing is, I think, where the main difference lies between an education that gives you that freedom and one that, like in India, like they take attendance, right? And if you're
Hmm.
not there, they call up your parents even at the college level. And
Yeah.
that's just, so now you're doing this, but that's an enforced discipline, which the moment university is over, like it gives you, like you face it then, and the later you face it, the more difficult it is to readjust your lifestyle and make it,
Yeah.
something that is
Yeah, no,
scheduled.
I mean, like, I absolutely agree. I think there was a report I was reading a couple of years ago, or maybe even last year. I think I've even discussed this with you at some point. Tata said that what 95, 93, 90%, something like that, some percentage of the graduates that they employ for the first year, they go through a retraining process. Like, I've never heard of any UK graduate having to go through a retraining process when they start the job. Like, they just start the job and get the job done. And I feel that,
Yeah, I
like,
mean,
the UK education system contributes to that in a significant manner.
that's true. I think, yeah, I mean, when I have, for example, in my course in the first year, I only had about 16 to 18 hours a week of contact time. That was time that I got with the professors in class, in lectures,
Hmm.
and in discussions. And I mean, if you just work that out to 5 days, it's like three
Yeah.
lectures a day, right? So I mean, that's nothing. It's like less than 3 hours a day of actual lecture time, and then the rest of the time you're just on your own,
Hmm.
and then that's a lot of time. And then you end up forming your own study groups. You go to the library, you discuss things with your classmates. There are lots of group projects, but all of that is left to you. It's not something that, so I can understand if you're like a shy person, how, and you're just going for the lectures and you're not connecting with your other classmates, how in a especially in a course like I was in, where it's all about communication, right?
Yeah.
Linguistics, that's the core of it. So if you don't communicate well with your own classmates, how you could definitely be left behind. So you're essentially forced by the way the system works to interact with each other and form, interpersonal skills too, which are also going to be helpful later in life.
Definitely. So if we rewind a little bit and
Sure.
we kind of look at things from your viewpoint, where you're from Mumbai, live in Dehradun as well. You go to a boarding school, all boys. You kind of graduate at the age of 18, and suddenly you find yourself in, I mean, like one of the most metropolitan, multicultural, vibrant cities in the world. Did you suffer from a culture shock, or did you like struggle in a few places?
So uh, there were a few struggles, but I feel extremely lucky that I had visited the UK before,
Mm-hmm.
and that because school had enough cultural exchange programs and enough opportunities to travel to various countries and experience their cultures. I think I had enough exposure that it did not shock me in a major way. I mean, in school, I was living in a hostel, and King's offers you for your first year as an international student a guaranteed spot at one of their hostels.
Mm-hmm.
So I was essentially moving from one kind of hostel life to another. It was good to not have to share your room like I had to at school and things like that. But the rest of the experience was fairly similar. I had to learn essentially how to cook my own food, which was, I think, more of the culture shock. And
Mm-hmm.
then obviously the fact that the city is your campus essentially, and the lectures are spread out across the city. I remember we had a couple of lectures at the Tate Modern and things like that. So essentially, like the entire class is going around looking at monuments in London and chilling there, and lunches at the South Bank Center and things like that, because that's essentially the closest place to the campus where you can just go after lectures and
Yep.
things like that. So the life was quite different from being in a boarding school where you can't exit the gates and you eat in the same space every day, you meet the same people every day. And so that I wouldn't call it a culture shock as much as a massive change in lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I enjoyed it, right? It's exciting to
Oh
get
yeah,
access to that
absolutely. It's an
and
adrenaline rush.
to have, yes. And so that's about it. And yeah.
Sweet, sweet. Again, coming back to before you went, what would have, like, now you've experienced the entire thing, you've got fond memories, some good, some bad. I mean, that's just the nature of the situation. But what were some things you probably would have liked to know before you went?
Okay. So
Like, if I give you an example of mine,
yeah, go for it.
mate, earphones. Like, someone, I mean, this sounds really weird, and I think it kind of is a bit weird and a bit wacky, but like, you should have told me, like, someone should have told me that when you go to university you need a set of earphones, because I mean, in school, like, we were living with our friends 24/7. So there was always someone to talk to, always some banter, there was always some activity going on. But the amount of time I spent alone at university on a bus, traveling to the squash courts, going to the gym, even walking up and down, like, to lectures and stuff, like, earphones and stuff like podcasts and music and YouTube and on my phone, like, it became a necessity.
It's true. Uh, yeah.
And if someone had told me that you need earphones, I would have just been like, yo, thank you. Because I just didn't realize how important they were until I got to
Okay.
uni.
That's actually true. I mean, yeah, earphones are something that you really need because you end up spending a lot of time by yourself, and everyone wants their own private space. So obviously, you can't blast music from your phone wherever you go.
Yeah.
And I think one other thing that's coming to mind is, especially in the UK, toilet paper.
Oh.
Toilet paper is something that Indians are not used to
Yeah.
using.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that is something that requires an adjustment in your lifestyle, and is something I remember the British Council in 2014 or something had invited me back to school to talk about this, and this was the question that came up, like, like, what should we know before we go there and stuff like that. So as I said, that the our school life did prepare us quite well. And so the biggest concern that I had in that moment was, guys, learn how to use toilet paper. There's no water in the washrooms,
And
okay,
I mean,
and
like,
stuff like that.
I'm
That
laughing.
it's true, and I mean,
Exactly.
it's a small cultural thing. Yeah, it's a small cultural difference, but it makes a big difference.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
they and especially, I went straight into like a halls of residence, which is what they call their hostels,
Hmm.
rather than directly having to rent out a space and finding other people to share an apartment with, which I ended up doing from my second year onwards. Especially when you get to the stage where you're sharing a house with other people, that's where a lot of the cultural differences come out. Like, people all cook different
Hmm.
things. People, all different cultures have different recipes. They have different kinds of things that they find appropriate and inappropriate. And when you're actually living with people from all over the world, and that is what I would recommend everyone to also do. Like, yes, I did join the India society and things like that. But most of my friends, like I would say an overwhelming majority of my friends, were not Indian at all,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to experience different cultures. And I knew I had enough Indian friends back home, right? So why am I going out and doing the things that in,
Yeah.
like I didn't want to live an Indian life
Yeah,
in
like
London.
imagine
So
moving
it's
moving
not,
out of India and going living in Southall.
exactly. I mean, there's no point in doing
Yeah.
that, right? So if you're living in a multicultural city, live a multicultural life and enjoy that aspect of it.
Amen.
And obviously, I understand that this is not for everyone, right? And I did end up working at an Indian restaurant 2 days a week for several months because I just missed Indian food
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. But apart from that, most of my experiences were like really non-Indian. I mean, I went for a lot of, like, I had a couple of Russian friends, so I went for a lot of,
Vodka nights.
like evening tea party kind of things. Yeah, essentially, to Russian cafes and,
Mm.
for a lot of pub crawls and pub quizzes with my friends from the UK, where it's a really, really popular activity. I joined the film society, and then within the film society, like met an Armenian person, and then she introduced me to a whole variety of how, like, there were several cafes and restaurants that just served Armenian food in London. And so I went through a full phase of, like just learning about Armenia, which is a country which I didn't know much about at all
Yeah.
before I went to the UK. I mean, I'd heard of it when we played Atlas, but that's about it, right? So, yeah, and then I had a Greek friend, and stuff like that. So, you end up learning about so many cultures, and that's I wouldn't call, again, just following back to your earlier question about culture shock. I think it's not as much a shock for me personally as it was just excitement to learn about new cultures. And so, yeah, I think I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you had some really, really solid experiences, and you were kind of a witness to the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, if we could kind of just dig into a little bit more about your lifestyle outside of university, like your extracurriculars and all. Obviously, I mean, I'm assuming you were involved in quite a few extracurricular activities. If you wanted to just kind of identify one or two which you think were just like your favorite extracurricular activities, what would they be?
Got it. So, I mean, see, I'm a techie, as you know, right? So within the first year itself, I had applied for this program at Microsoft called the Microsoft Student Partner
Yep.
Program, which opened up an entire avenue for me of experiences, from being invited to various events for launches of different products or services across the city, to, talking to the various students at my university and at other universities about technology, and essentially evangelizing Microsoft products, but things like that. Also things like
Mm-hmm.
hackathons and massive conferences, like Comic Con and stuff like that, which a lot of tech people go
Yeah.
to. And so all of those experiences really came together. I mean, some of my closest friends even today from university are the ones that I met through Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
And it also opens up, some kind of professional avenue for you, because they allow you to get a lot of actual real life work experience and get a mentor or two at Microsoft,
Mm-hmm.
which, is a big company, right? So you actually learn what things happen at work and stuff like that. And it gave me a lot of opportunities throughout my years of college. So that was one. A second thing that I ended up doing a lot was, I ended up joining the film society, because a couple of my friends from my initial halls of residence were doing the film courses, and I was interested in films, right? And then they had this, I think weekly, every Thursday night they had film night. So that became a regular part of my weekly life cycle when I was at
Mm-hmm.
university. That every Thursday night I would go for a movie, and then after the movie, all of us would go out, and then just have great conversations. And that branched out into going for, the British Film Institute, the London Film Festival, the, going to a lot of theaters to watch a few plays and things like that. because as students in London, I mean, that's the best way to live in London, right? As a
Yeah.
student, everything is
Oh, yeah.
subsidized and you get to experience each and everything that you could possibly want
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as a student. So, even the IMAX every Wednesday nights had $5 tickets for us, whereas the actual price was $15. So there was,
Yeah, yeah. That student card
yeah,
is the
so
holy
there was
grail.
no, yeah. So there was no real reason to not go because why not? Okay, it's not that expensive. So I ended up, the Film Society did open up a lot of interest in me towards film to the point where my dissertation at the end of my undergraduate degree was on Bollywood and how, like different cultures and roles have changed in Bollywood over the decades and stuff like that. Okay. So, like your other experiences, your extracurricular activities can have a direct impact on your education. And so these were a couple of things. There were several other things that I did, but this was, I think, the core of my weekly
Yeah,
lifestyle.
yeah. That point that you mentioned right now, that your extracurricular activities can have an effect on your education. I mean, I completely agree with
Yep.
that. I just think that education is a little bit bigger than academics.
It is, yeah, it is. It honestly is. Academic education only goes that far, right? And so I did, a couple of part-time jobs over the
Mm-hmm.
years. And so I think those taught me a lot about a different aspect of life than what my academic education would have taught me, which, I mean, I still did a degree in linguistics,
Yeah.
okay, which at the core of it, it's about communication. So there is still an aspect of skill development that takes place within the classrooms that isn't, because it's not a purely academic
Yeah.
degree, right? It's I mean, one of my projects for the holidays was over the summer to essentially conduct an anthropological study of any group of people that I interacted with. And so, what that essentially meant was that, and a linguistic study. So, what that essentially meant was that I recorded a 15-minute conversation of friends meeting for one of our founders' day dinners. And then just over dinner, I recorded a 15-minute segment with everyone's permission, just sitting at a restaurant here in Dehradun, where I am right now, and then just noting down everything that they did linguistically.
Mm-hmm.
So the different blends of language that took place, because obviously I was back in India, there were a lot of Hindi words and some local lingo that was thrown in because our boarding school had its own little variations of language and its own words and idiosyncrasies that were thrown in, and then taking all of this together, and this ended up becoming 4,000-5,000 word essay on how language functions. So just you know academically too, I would imagine that you can gain a lot and you can learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the extracurriculars matter too. I think it's a whole, right? I would never say that one is more important than the
Oh,
other.
yeah.
In my personal experience, both are as important.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, both hold equal value depending on, but it could shift one way or the other depending on personal preferences. It just completely depends
Yep.
on the individual.
True.
We've kind of walked through the entire cycle, and I just want to kind of ask a question. What do you do now? And how did your experiences at King's and the University of Edinburgh help in kind of paving the way to what you're currently doing?
So presently, I am a digital consultant and I make
Mm-hmm.
digital experiences for brands and businesses, such as websites and web applications and things like that, which allow them to project their digital identities and communicate better with their customers and clients and potential clients. So that's essentially what I do right now. And it ties in directly with my experience at the university level. And even going before that, I was always into design. And that design aspect was tempered a lot with my education about how to communicate and the different forms and mediums of communication, and how, where a video is effective compared to where text is effective, where having a one-to-one person meeting would be more effective. And all of these different media were part of my undergraduate degree. And,
Mhm.
having a holistic knowledge about how communication actually takes place, what to say to convince people, and things like that were also a part of the degree. And so all of this knowledge comes, it manifests itself in different ways. It's not like I studied exactly how to make a website. That's an application of
Yeah.
my education, because a website is just a communication tool where you want to present a particular message from one person to another person. It would be the same thing that a phone call would, except in a visual
Yep.
format. So
It's a different
yeah,
medium.
it's a different medium, but in the end, it's all about communication. And at the core of my course was communication. So, and even when I went for my masters, which I dropped out of, I did a lot. A lot of my focus was on cognitive science, about how people think and how they communicate with each other. And yeah, so everything built up from that. And so
Mhm.
that's essentially what I do presently. I've got my own firm that designs digital experiences for brands.
I like that. I mean, designing digital experiences. Who would have thought? That's pretty awesome. I guess the only question I have left is, are you an advocate of international higher education? And if so, why?
So I feel that that exposure which you get from, and not just from international higher education, but that exposure that you get from living amongst different cultures and different kinds of people, makes your personality
Hmm.
a lot more rounded. And at the age you are at when you go to, let's say, high school and university, those are your formative years where your identity is essentially being formed. If you end up living in a multicultural environment at that point in time, it has a really big impact on your overall identity, sense of identity and personality, where you become
Hmm.
a lot more accepting of different cultures and different people. And I think that in itself, that experience, and especially because of international higher education, you get to do it for multiple years at a stretch. And
Yep.
being exposed to something for that long, you essentially end up absorbing a lot of that. And that's, I think, very, very important, because it at least lets you communicate with a wide variety of people without making a fool of yourself.
That's so true. Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing your experiences with me today.
Most definitely. I'm glad to be here. And I wish you the very best of luck for your upcoming episodes. And yeah, let me know if you need anything else. Thank you.
Before we sign off, I'm just going to give one final shout out. Abhilaksh, Lalwani, guys. Thank you for tuning into the episode. If you have listened to it, I have a slight disclaimer. Lalwani is the founder of ALP Digital, ALP Digital, which also powers the website. To be very honest with you, this is my first foray into creating content, and I was very nervous about what the website's going to come out as. And this guy completely smashed out of the park. Couldn't be happier. So definitely check it out. Thank you for tuning in.